Good afternoon and welcome to our Tanya class, our shir of the tale of two souls of both neshamas. Um, just to sum up very quickly, in chapter 1, the Alter Rebbe discussed the natural or animal soul of the Jew. We said that the animal soul derives from klipa. Klipa is the opposite side, which literally means shell, or the other side, the side that's not holy. But that does not mean that is to be identified with a person's evil traits. The evil traits come from that soul, but it's not that that soul is evil. The natural soul embodies the life of man and imparts to him all his human qualities, including his intellect and his aesthetic sense. Just as the natural soul of an animal imparts to an animal its particular qualities in nature, the animal soul of the human imparts to him his natural qualities. If man learns to properly activate his soul, he can thereby attain great heights and create many good and beautiful things. However, this is all within the sphere of human capacity, which, great as it may be, has nothing to do with holiness. So this is the aspect of human which is not related to holiness, and which today, in the second chapter, the Alter Rebbe is going to begin to explain that we have another aspect to us, and that's we'll see in a minute, which refers to the chelik alakat, a part of God Himself, as we'll see. The second soul of the Jew is part of God above, literally, the Alter Rebbe writes. This is the godly element of man, the spark of divine essence that manifests itself in his being and experience. So, the nefesh hashenis b'Yisrael, the Alter Rebbe says, the second nefesh of a Jew, is part of God above. And this phrase, the part of God above, is a quote from Job. However, the Alter Rebbe refers to as the author, the Alter Rebbe, the author adds the word mamish. It's not just an expression, a part of God above, it's actual, mamish means tangibly or literally. To stress that it is to be understood most literally. The godly soul in man is not figuratively a part of God, but actually and literally so. Just to point out, it is because we have this godly soul, is how the Alter Rebbe holds us to the highest standard when it comes to our behavioral life. In thought, in speech, and in action, we are to be perfect because we have the ability to be perfect, because we have this godly soul, this literal part of God in us. Just to point out, Alter Rebbe refers to this, to the godly soul as the second soul, although, let me just put away my phone in case it rings, although it's from a spiritual perspective, it's on a higher plane and a higher level. Nonetheless, it's secondary because it comes to the human being in second place, meaning our sages tell us that man is born with his evil inclination, and only later, upon maturity, upon bar mitzvah, age of 13 for a man, age 12 for a woman, he acquires a good inclination. And as we learned in the previous class, that the evil inclination is the group of emotional traits that stem from the animal soul, whereas the good inclination is that of the emotional traits of the godly soul. Just another reason to point out why the animal soul, why the godly soul is referred to as the secondary soul, is because the godly soul cannot function until the animal soul, the natural soul, if you wish, is fully developed and fully functional. That's why it manifests itself only upon the age of bar mitzvah. It's like putting a human soul in a stone. It has no way of manifesting itself, has no way of functioning. And so too, putting a godly soul of man into a human being before it's developed won't be able to function properly until the animalistic soul, the human, is fully developed at the age of maturity. So therefore, the Alter Rebbe refers to it as the nefesh hashenis b'Yisrael. And now that was going on to say, "V'nefesh hashenis b'Yisrael, he chelik alakam mamash," and he quotes the verses again allegorically. The Alter Rebbe explains how the nefesh hashenis b'Yisrael is a part of God itself, because it says when it's in Genesis, speaking about the creation of human, by all the rest of creation, it says Hashem spoke, as we know about Sarah Maris. God said, may there be light, may the earth sprout forth vegetation, may there be animals, and God created it with His speech, so to speak. Again, it's not in a physical sense. Hashem doesn't have a human body where He speaks from, but allegorically, we're saying just like when a human, when he speaks, he doesn't necessarily have to take so much exertion from the human being. It comes on a, relatively speaking, on an easy expression. However, when a person exhales, it comes from a much deeper place. And the Torah in Genesis, when describing the creation of human, the Torah says, "Vayipach bi'apav nishvas chayim." God exhaled into the human being a neshama, a soul. And just to point out, neshama literally also is the same root as neshima, of breathing. So our neshama, our soul, our spiritual soul, was Hashem exhaled into us. When you exhale, it comes from a much deeper part of the person. And similarly, exhaling is an expression of something that's coming from a much deeper part of God Himself. It says Vayipach bi'apa, Hashem blew into the nostrils of human, exhaled. And also we say in our morning prayers every morning, V'ata nefachta bi, Hashem exhaled into us a neshama. And the Zohar explains, the Kabbalah explains that man de nafach, if someone is exhaling in contrast to speaking, it comes from a much deeper part of the person, from his internal part, and therefore he needs to use much greater exertion from his internal portion of the human being. From his if a person is going to exhale, the life force which he exhales comes from a much deeper place. Similarly, and so since the Torah uses the term that God exhaled the soul of human, so it comes from a much deeper part of Hashem than the rest of creation. And this is what the Alter Rebbe is going to explain, that the human comes from a deeper part from Hashem, which is from Hashem's wisdom, from His machshav, from His thought, which is a much more united with the person. And when again, speaking allegorically, when you speak about a person's thoughts, his thoughts are much more part of his soul than his speech. Speech is already the next level. It's deep, deep parts from the human being. His thoughts are much more united with his essence. And so it says, so similarly, it says, Neshamas Yisrael, Olu b'machshava, that the neshama of a Jew, Olu b'machshava, came up in Hashem's thoughts. It was united with Hashem in his thoughts. And additionally, the Torah refers to the Jewish people as Hashem's eldest son. B'ni b'cheri Yisrael. And in another verse it says, Banim atem Hashem Elokeichem, that you are children to your God. So what's the connection? What's the relation between referring to us as being Hashem's children? Banim atem Hashem Elokeichem, B'ni b'cheri Yisrael, you're my son, you're my children. The Alter is going to explain the Alter is going to explain the concept of that the godly soul is a part of God above, literally based on the metaphors that the Torah employs in reference to the soul. Here, as is my firstborn Israel. So this allegory that Hashem is comparing us, Neshamas Yisrael, to His children, is apparently taken from ancient medical science, which believed that the seminal seed originates as in a spiritual substance that comes from the father's brain. Speaking in a very practical sense, the ancient science believes, and the Alter Rebbe is following the ancient science, and it doesn't contradict modern science, but the Alter Rebbe wrote this several hundred years ago, that the spirit, the seminal seed of a child originates from the father's brain, and the seed is released from the brain and passes through the body. It gradually, as it passes through the body, it gradually coarsens and materializes until it assumes its physical form as a droplet of semen, which later enters the womb and develops into a human being. So we see from here that the relationship from a child to his father is not just a physical relationship. The child came from the father. It actually comes from a part of the father's brain. It has the father's psychological essence, and a part of the father's personality. So it's a much deeper relationship from a child to a son. In a similar and allegorical way, the Jewish people are related to Hashem, but we come from a deepest part from Hashem's machshava, Hashem's thoughts, Hashem's brain. So this is the allegory. Just like a son, a child, a son or a daughter for the same. Similarly, the neshama, allegorically, the neshama of every single Jew, man or woman, nimshecha mimachshavte v'chachmasta yisbarich, comes from Hashem's thought and Hashem's wisdom. The Alter is going to continue to explain that if, in theory, if every neshama, every Jewish soul comes from Hashem's brain, how is it that there are different levels of Jewish people? There are so many different levels upon levels upon levels. More holy, more spiritual, more great. So the Alter is going to explain as follows: there's thousands upon thousands of levels in souls, Gavaya al Gavaya, one above the other, level upon level. In case it's infinite amount of levels. You have, for instance, the Alter is the example of the level of the neshama of our forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then you have the us today, several thousand, where we don't even reach. Uh, we're not able to uh, compare ourselves in any way to that type of spiritual level. They have the level of Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, al neshamas teresenu ela the ikve mashicha shem b'chins akvaim. We're compared to the soul of a foot, compared to the head, the brain. So how is it possible? As I was saying, that if we each come from the same place, from Hashem's brain, how is it that there's so many different levels? And there says in every generation, not only you have from comparing from our forefathers, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe Rabbeinu, and us. In this generation itself, you have great leaders, great spiritual leaders, and you have the simple folk. So the Alter was going to explain. Nonetheless, even though we see there's so many different levels upon levels, we each originate from the same place. Nonetheless, Shadish, the source of Kol HaNefesh, Ruach HaNeshama Kulam, all the souls, Mereish Kol HaMadregas, from the beginning of all levels, At Seif Kolak, until the very end of each level, Nimshach Mimayach Ha'elyon, still comes from the brain above, referring to Hashem's wisdom. Shehi Chachmei Lakav Yachol. How is that possible? The Alter explains, Kamashal haben hanimshach mimayach ha'ov, she'afilu tziparnei raglov nishavu mitibuzu mamish, al gidei sheyasa tisha chadashim bebetin ha'ein v'yarda madrega madrega. So the Alter was giving the example of a human being. A human being has a brain, and he has a toenail. The same toenail and the same brain come from the same source. Nonetheless, as the child is in the womb, it develops into a full, complete human being, and there's certain cells and certain portions that are the brain, and certain portions end up being a toenail. They all have the same source. So therefore, the Alter was saying it's not a contradiction. It's not a contradiction. Alter was saying that we see different levels of neshamas, different levels of souls. You have the neshamas of the avos of our forefathers, and you have the neshamas of Moshe Rabbeinu, and you have us today, and in our generation itself. It all could originate from the same source. Nonetheless, in the process of traveling from one level to the other level, as we'll speak about throughout the whole Tanya, the Alter explains that there's so many different levels where the neshama travels through until it comes into a human being, the neshama travels through. Generally, there's like as we mentioned, there's Atzilus, Bria, Yitzira, Asiyim. There's different levels, different worlds until the neshama becomes the neshama of a human being. Just like through the 9 months of the child being in the womb, it develops into a complete human being, and certain cells and certain portions become the brain, and certain portions become the toenail and the feet, and so on, and everything in between. So too, when the neshama is developed throughout its travels and throughout its levels, many different levels of developing in the spiritual worlds, some neshamas come down to be the great leaders and forefathers of the Jewish people, and some develop to be the simple folk. But nonetheless, we each have this chelik alakama. We each have a godly soul, and since we nonetheless we each have the godly soul. Alter Rebbe is telling us we each have. That's what I was going to explain in the further chapters. We each have the ability to attain perfection when it comes to our behavior, because we each have. It doesn't change the fact that some of us are great leaders and some of us are more simple. We each have that chelek alakam imal mamash, that literal part of Hashem in us, and therefore we each have the ability, and we each can be held accountable to reach a level of perfection when it comes to serving Hashem in our action. Which where we do not have the ability to change is to become void of the evil inclination. That's, as mentioned earlier, we don't have the ability to rid ourselves of the evil inclination. We have the ability to control the evil inclination, but not rid of it, not to rid ourselves of it. And with the tzaddik, the righteous person has the ability to rid himself from this evil inclination. So that's how the Alter Rebbe Alter Rebbe reaches this point by giving the whole allegory, the whole analogy, that every yid has this nefesh hashenis, this second soul, and although it's a higher soul, it's the shenis. It manifests itself later on. We have it potentially, obviously, as we're born, but it doesn't develop and manifest itself till later on. And since we have this ability, therefore, even the Beinani, even the intermediate person, has the ability to reach perfection when it comes to his actions. We'll stop here for today, and we'll continue on next week. We will not have a share on Thursday. Wishing everybody the holiday of Shavuot. This begins Thursday night. The Rebbe used to wish everyone Kabbalah Satira. We should receive the Torah every year. It's not just reading a history book and understanding that we received the Torah many thousands of years ago. Every year, a new Hashem gives us the Torah, and we receive the Torah happily. B'simcha, we should receive the Torah happily, and meaning internalize the Torah in our lives.